Commander, let's light the sky. Training sharper drone pilots, learning how to fly. Mission ready mindset, safety leading every plan. Skills that build confidence from takeoff through the scan. Tune in at Sky Commander, come join the crew today. Learning smart, fly with purpose, level up your way. We see more, no sooner, that's the edge we're here to spread. See above, go beyond, get ahead.
Okay, let's get started.
So we've all been there. You download a new app or you sign up for some service online, and suddenly you are confronted with it.
Oh yeah, the endless scroll.
Exactly. The endless scroll, the terms and conditions, it is this massive, intimidating wall of text.
Yeah.
And it's written in a language that, technically it resembles English, but it is entirely incomprehensible to anyone who hasn't actually passed the bar exam.
Right. And nobody reads it.
Nobody reads it. You just, you scroll furiously down to the bottom, you wait for that little accept button to finally turn blue, you check the box, and you move on with your life. You've essentially just participated in this shared cultural illusion.
It's a bureaucratic ritual, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A ritual that makes corporate lawyers sleep soundly, but does absolutely nothing to inform you of the actual risks you just accepted. So imagine taking that exact same psychological dynamic, that totally mindless, rapid-fire scrolling and thoughtless box checking, and applying it to the moment right before you launch a high-speed, 15-pound flying blender into the sky over a populated area.
Which is terrifying when you frame it that way.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
And that is the exact illusion we are tearing down today in this deep dive, because we've been looking through this really fascinating set of source materials, specifically the 7 Gates of Precision Preflight Checklist Design from the Sky Commander series. And it makes this really terrifyingly good point.
That most operators in the commercial drone industry are relying on checklists that are essentially just useless terms and conditions.
Yes, which creates a massive vulnerability in the whole system.
It really does. Because when you frame it that way, a checklist stops being a safety tool, right?
Yeah.
It just becomes an exercise in liability management. People are taking these huge documents out into the field and they are standing there in the cold. They are dealing with a client breathing down their neck. They're fighting the wind and they have this massive document that feels fundamentally useless to the actual reality of their situation.
Right, because it wasn't built for the field.
Exactly. And so the core thesis we are going to be unpacking today from this 7 Gates model is that a real functional pre-flight checklist is not paperwork at all. It is a decision-making matrix.
A decision-making matrix. I like that.
Yeah, if your checklist feels like a chore, if it feels like a barrier you just have to quote-unquote get through so you can start the real work of flying the aircraft, then the checklist has already failed you. A well-designed checklist is the pilot's very first act of command.
Okay, I'm really stuck on that phrase, first act of command.
Yeah.
Because if a bad checklist is just a wall of words pretending to be safety, then a good checklist has to be fundamentally different in how it forces you to behave.
Right. It has to change your physical and mental posture.
Yeah. And the source material introduces a diagnostic tool for this, and they call it the suck test, which is, a very technical aviation term, obviously.
Oh, highly technical.
But it addresses this exact problem, right? How do we know if the paperwork we are holding in the field is actually serving us, or if it's just wasting our time?
Well, the suck test is brilliant because it is rooted in operational reality rather than, boardroom theory. A checklist fails the suck test, meaning it actively sucks if it is simply too long to use under actual pressure.
Because of the cognitive load.
Exactly. Think about the cognitive load on a pilot in the field.
Right.
You have environmental stress, the wind is picking up, maybe the temperature is dropping, daylight is fading.
And the client is literally tapping their watch.
Yeah, they're paying by the hour. So in that environment, the human brain naturally wants to shed cognitive load. It just wants to skip ahead to the action. If your checklist takes 10 minutes to read and has 70 individual items, your brain simply will not process it. You are not going to read it. You are just going to skim it.
So it's almost like the length of the document actively encourages negligence. You are so overwhelmed by the sheer volume of things to check that you end up checking nothing at all.
That phenomenon actually has a name in the industry. It's known as pencil whipping.
Pencil whipping.
Yeah, you are physically making a check mark on a clipboard or you're tapping a screen, but your cognitive faculties are not engaged whatsoever. You are bypassing the critical thinking phase entirely. The brain gets fatigued by mundane repetition. So a 70-item checklist that gets pencil whipped is infinitely more dangerous than an 11-item checklist that forces the pilot to stop, look at the reality in front of them, and make a conscious evaluation.
But hold on, let me push back on that for a second. If I condense my checklist down to a single index card, just to save time in the field,
Yeah.
aren't I basically handing the regulatory agencies like the FAA in the U.S. or Transport Canada, aren't I handing them an excuse to fine me or revoke my license if something goes wrong?
That is the exact fear most operators have.
Right. I feel like I'm stripping away my legal protection just for the sake of speed.
Ah.
We are so conditioned to believe that thorough means safer, and thorough usually means long.
It's a very valid fear, and it is exactly why so many operators drag these utterly useless 40-page manuals out into the field with them. But the 7 Gates model solves this through what they call the 2-layer checklist concept.
Oh, what are the 2 layers?
So you are not throwing away the regulations, you are just moving them to the appropriate layer of your operation. Layer 1 is your field checklist. This is the short, punchy, single-page, or even a phone screen tool. It is designed purely for the cockpit environment, meant to be used in the elements.
Right, the 11-item list you mentioned.
Exactly. Layer 2 is your master procedure. That is the detailed, comprehensive document. But that document is sitting back in your office or maybe in the glove box of your truck.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So the master procedure is the why, and the field checklist is the what.
It's even more connected than that, actually. The master procedure is your legal and your training foundation. For example, if we look at Transport Canada's CRR 901.23, it explicitly requires pilots to establish and follow normal and emergency procedures. They expect actual documented processes.
They want to see the receipts.
Right. So the master procedure outlines the specific compliance standards, how to verify every single item, what the acceptable tolerances are, and what specific conditions trigger a cancellation of the flight. The field checklist is simply the trigger for the knowledge you have already internalized from studying that master procedure.
So you studied the big document, but you fly with the small one.
Yes. Your field checklist must be tiny enough to actually use under severe stress, but your master procedure must be strong enough to defend your actions to an aviation inspector or a judge.
The text uses a really grounding analogy for this that I loved. It compares the pre-flight checklist to locking down a trailer before you merge onto a busy highway.
Oh, the trailer hitch analogy, it's perfect.
It really is. Like when you are standing behind your truck in the freezing rain, you do not need to pull out a 40-page essay detailing the metallurgical properties of the steel in the trailer hitch.
No, you'd freeze to death before you finished reading it.
Exactly. You just need to know the practical realities. Is the hitch physically secure? Do the brake lights actually illuminate when I press the pedal? Is the heavy load strapped down tight? Are the tires visibly inflated? And, do I have a mental plan for what I'm going to do if the trailer starts swaying at 60 miles per hour?
That analogy perfectly captures what we call operational discipline. See, compliance with the rules is just the floor. It's the bare minimum required to not get arrested. Operational discipline is the ceiling. It is how you actually keep people safe in the real world. And a huge part of operational discipline is recognizing that the technology itself cannot be fully trusted to assess its own readiness.
Which brings us to what I like to call the trap of the app.
Yeah.
Because the drone software is just constantly trying to tell us that we are good to go.
Oh, it wants you to fly.
It really does. You turn on the controller, and there's this massive, reassuring green banner across the top of the screen that just says, ready to fly. And my brain immediately interprets that as, awesome, the machine has done the hard work, it has run its diagnostics, and we are completely cleared for takeoff.
That is one of the most insidious traps in modern drone aviation. The ready-to-fly banner is a massive lie of omission.
A lie of omission.
Wow. Because when the DJI app or Autel or whatever flight software you are using displays that green banner, it is only checking a very specific, incredibly narrow set of internal machine parameters.
Like what? What is it actually looking at?
It is verifying that the GPS module has acquired enough satellites to calculate a position.
Right.
It is checking that the internal compass isn't detecting massive magnetic interference from, like, a metal grate you set it on.
Right.
It is confirming that the firmware versions between the drone and the controller match.
So it's essentially just saying, I am a functioning computer.
Yes. The app is completely blind to reality. The software does not know if you, the human pilot, have been awake for 20 hours and are operating on 4 cups of coffee. It does not know if there is a massive construction crane actively swinging into your planned flight path.
It doesn't know if it's raining.
Exactly. It does not know if your client is aggressively pressuring you to fly over a busy intersection against regulations. The app checks the machine. The pilot must check the operation.
And even if we fully acknowledge that the app doesn't know everything, we still have our own human hubris to deal with, right? Like the familiarity trap. You hear pilots say this all the time. Oh, I fly this exact route with this exact drone 3 times a week. I know the pre-flight by heart.
Which is terrifying because memory is the enemy of the checklist. And paradoxically, it is the most experienced, highly skilled pilots who are most vulnerable to this.
Wait, really? The experts are more vulnerable?
Absolutely, because when you are a novice, you are terrified. So you follow the list item by item. When you are an expert, the routine becomes so ingrained that your brain engages in a form of confirmation bias.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. If you skip a step, let's say you forget to check the physical locking mechanism on the propellers, your brain will literally manufacture a false memory of you checking them, simply because you have checked them 1,000 times before.
That is so wild. Your brain just fills in the blank with what it expects to have happened.
Right. So the checklist exists to protect the pilot from 5 very specific human enemies: hurry, familiarity, client pressure, overconfidence, and distraction.
So we are fundamentally building a system to protect ourselves from ourselves, which completely flips the script on what the very first step of a pre-flight should be. Usually,
Right.
we think about pulling the drone out of the hard case and checking the plastic and the motors, but according to the 7 Gates model, the very first thing we have to evaluate is flesh and blood. So let's unpack Gate 1, the human element.
Gate 1 is entirely about the people. Are the pilot and the crew fit, briefed, and genuinely ready to operate? Because before you ever power on a single battery, you have to run a diagnostic on yourself.
Which is hard to do objectively.
It is, but the regulatory bodies take this incredibly seriously. In the United States, the FAA's Part 107 regulations mandate that the remote pilot in command must be in a physical and mental condition that allows for the safe operation of the aircraft. Canada's CRR 901.19 is even more explicit and strict.
What do the Canadian rules say?
It legally prohibits any crew member from acting if they are suffering from fatigue or if they are within 12 hours of consuming any alcohol, which is the classic aviation rule of bottle to throttle.
Bottle to throttle. I've heard that. So to structure that self-diagnostic, the aviation world uses the I am safe mnemonic. That's IMSAFE. Illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and emotion, or eating. It's a personal inventory. And I want to really linger on the E at the end of that for a second. Emotion and eating. We all intuitively understand alcohol and medication, but how often does a pilot actually ground themselves just because they skipped lunch?
Almost never, which is exactly why it's so critical to have it on the list. The source text gives us scenario 5, which brilliantly illustrates the hidden danger of ignoring these human factors.
Oh, right. The hungry pilot scenario.
Yeah, imagine a scenario where the aircraft is meticulously maintained, the weather is a flawless 70 degrees with 0 wind, the site is legally cleared, every single machine metric is absolutely perfect.
Sounds like a dream shoot.
It is, on paper, but you, the pilot, slept horribly the night before. You hit snooze 3 times, you rushed out the door, and you completely skipped breakfast. You arrive on site, and you immediately have a tense, highly stressful phone call with your boss about a delayed invoice.
Okay, so my blood sugar is completely in the basement, my cortisol levels are through the roof, and I'm staring at a perfectly functioning drone.
Precisely. And if you only look at the machine, you are going to launch. But physiologically, you are compromised. Low blood sugar severely degrades your depth perception, your reaction time, and your ability to process multiple streams of spatial information.
It makes you sloppy.
Extremely sloppy. And high stress causes tunnel vision, where you fixate on the objective, getting the shot, and you completely ignore peripheral hazards like a pedestrian blindly walking into your landing zone while looking at their phone.
Wow.
In scenario 5, the machine passes with flying colors, but the human is a catastrophic failure waiting to happen. The I am safe checklist forces you to stop, acknowledge your physiological state, and maybe say, hey, we are delaying this launch by 20 minutes so I can eat a protein bar and drink some water.
That is a massive paradigm shift. Just admitting that you, the human, are the weak link. But Gate 1 isn't just about the pilot, right? It's the entire crew. Specifically, the dynamic between the RPIC, the remote pilot in command, and the VO, the visual observer.
Yes, the crew dynamic is huge.
Because the RPIC is the person holding the sticks, the ultimate authority on the Gonago call. But the VO role seemed to be wildly misunderstood in the industry. I mean, half the time the VO is just the client or a random buddy who came along to watch the cool drone fly.
Which is a profound liability. A visual observer is not a spectator in a high-vis vest. They are an active, integrated component of the safety system.
They have a job to do.
A critical job. The source text uses scenario 4 to demonstrate this. So imagine you are doing a complex utility inspection and you bring along a new VO. You give them a safety vest and ask, all right, what are you going to do if you see a low-flying helicopter? And the VO kind of shrugs and says, I guess I'll just yell and let you know.
That feels exactly like having a spotter at the gym who doesn't actually know the workout plan.
How do you mean?
Like you're bench pressing heavyweight and the spotter doesn't know how many reps you're going for. They don't know your failure signs and they don't know when to physically grab the bar. They're just standing over you, watching you struggle until the barbell eventually pins you to the bench.
That is a staggering way to visualize it, but it's entirely accurate. A quiet VO is a useless VO. If a helicopter breaches the airspace or a rogue vehicle drives into the designated landing zone, the pilot, who is hyper-focused on a screen and managing the aircraft's telemetry, does not have the cognitive bandwidth to interpret vague, panic statements.
Right, like if the VO just screams, "Hey, watch out, look over there."
Exactly. Where is there? What am I watching out for? Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Is it a toddler?
So the VO needs a script.
They need a highly rigid communication protocol. The VO must be trained to deliver actionable intelligence instantly. They need to say, aircraft sighted, north quadrant, low altitude, moving south, hold your position. Or, pedestrian entering the primary recovery zone, abort landing, climb to 100 feet. The VO processes the chaos of the environment and hands the pilot a clean, binary data point.
Which naturally leads to how we actually establish those protocols on site.
Yeah.
The crew briefing. And the mantra from the text is, brief before blades. Before those propellers even twitch, everyone on site needs to understand the choreography of the operation. And there's a mnemonic for this as well. C-Crew, C-R-E-W.
Communications, roles, emergencies, work plan.
Right. And how long should that take?
We should clarify that a serial briefing does not need to be a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation in a boardroom. A professional, highly effective briefing can be delivered standing at the tailgate of a truck in under 60 seconds.
So it's fast, but structured.
Exactly. You define the communications, how we talk to each other. You define the roles, who is doing what. You define the emergencies, what our immediate actions are if things go sideways. And you define the work plan, what the actual physical path of the drone will be.
The source distills this whole crew dynamic into one of the best quotes I've seen in aviation literature. It says, "The client can request, the observer can advise, the aircraft can warn, the RPIC decides."
That is the essence of command right there. The pilot is the ultimate filter. You take all the inputs, the client's desires, the VO's observations, the drone's telemetry alerts, and you synthesize them into a single binding decision.
So we've established that the human pilot is fit to fly, and the crew knows their exact jobs. But a clear head doesn't matter if the environment itself is a trap, right? The sky is essentially a three-dimensional minefield. So how do we translate our readiness into the physical space we are about to occupy? Let's navigate into place, space, and paper. This covers gates 2, 3, and 4.
Let's start with gate 2, paper and permissions, because this is the foundation of your legal reality. Do you have your required pilot certificate physically on your person? Is the registration number properly affixed to the drone? And crucially, do you have the airspace authorizations necessary for this specific location? For instance, in the US, checking LANC.
Okay, let's pause on LANC, because that's an acronym that gets thrown around constantly.
Yeah.
LANC. What is it actually doing behind the scenes?
LANC stands for the Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability. It is a massive technological bridge between the commercial drone industry and the FAA's air traffic control system.
Because it used to be a nightmare to get permission.
Oh, it was awful. In the past, if you wanted to fly near an airport, you had to submit literal paperwork and wait months for manual approval. LANC digitizes the airspace grid around hundreds of airports. You open an approved app, request to fly at, say, 100 feet in a specific grid sector, and the system instantly checks that against air traffic rules and grants you an automated, legally binding authorization in seconds.
That's incredible.
It is. So Gate 2 asks, did you actually get that LANC approval, or are you just hoping nobody notices? In Canada, it's asking if your operation requires an advanced certificate and if your drone is safety assured for the exact environment you are in.
So Gate 2 is the legal clearance. Gate 3 is the physical reality, the place. And this relies on the site survey. Now, both the Canadian CARs, specifically 901.27, and the U.S. Part 107.49 mandate a thorough assessment of the operating environment. But the source material makes a really aggressive distinction between two terms that I think most pilots use totally interchangeably: flight geography and operational volume. What is the actual difference there?
The distinction between those two terms is the difference between an amateur and a professional.
Oh, wow. Okay, break that down.
Flight geography is simply the planned area where the aircraft is intended to fly. It is the route you draw on your iPad. It is the literal box you want to map. Operational volume, however, is the three-dimensional mission box. It encompasses the flight geography, plus the entire contiguous airspace where the drone could reasonably be expected to travel during the execution of that flight.
Like if it drifts.
Exactly. It includes the climb out, the loiter, the descent, and the contingency margins if the wind pushes it off course, or if momentum carries it further than you planned during a fast pass.
I see. So if I just drop a pin on a Google map and say, I'm shooting this building, that is entirely two-dimensional. I'm just defining a point on the ground.
Exactly. A pin on a map is utterly useless for a site survey. You have to imagine drawing a massive, invisible, three-dimensional bubble around your entire operation. The site survey is the deliberate act of interrogating everything inside, above, and below that bubble.
To structure that interrogation, we use the site mnemonic, SITE, sky, interference, terrain, environment. So sky means checking the airspace class and NOTAMs. And NOTAMs notices to air missions are critical because the airspace changes dynamically, right? Like a NOTAM might tell you that the president is flying into town and the entire city is grounded, or that there's a temporary flight restriction over a stadium for a football game.
Right, and if you don't check, you are committing a federal offense. Then we check for interference. This is massive for drones because they rely on radio links. We are looking for high voltage power lines, massive steel bridges, or dense clusters of cellular towers that will blast your command link with radio frequency noise and cause a loss of control.
Which is terrifying.
It is. Then terrain covers the physical landscape, the roads, the buildings, and crucially, the people on the ground. And finally, environment brings us to Gate 4. Weather.
And weather is a lot more complex than just sticking your hand out the window to see if it's raining.
Immensely more complex. Weather encompasses sustained wind speeds, but more importantly, wind gusts. A drone might be rated to handle a 20-mile-per-hour steady wind, but a sudden 35-mile-per-hour gust rolling over a building will flip it over.
Yeah, the turbulence.
Right. Weather is also visibility. Can you actually see the drone a half-mile away through the morning haze? It's the angle of the sun. If you are flying east at sunrise, the glare can completely blind both the pilot and the visual observer.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. The sun is weather.
It absolutely is. And in colder climates, weather is icing.
Icing on a drone, like the same way a commercial jet gets de-iced at the airport.
Exactly the same physics. Transport Canada's CAR 901.35 strictly prohibits flying with frost, ice, or snow adhering to any critical surfaces of the drone.
Because it messes with the lift.
It completely destroys the lift. When a drone flies through visible moisture like fog or low clouds, when the temperature is near freezing, ice rapidly accumulates on the leading edge of the propellers. This destroys the aerodynamics of the blade. It creates immense drag, forces the tiny motors to work twice as hard, drains the battery in minutes, and will eventually cause the drone to literally fall out of the sky like a brick.
Let's ground all of this spatial and weather theory into a really terrifying reality. Scenario 1 from the text, the invisible wire.
This one is a nightmare.
It is. So you are hired to do a commercial roof inspection. The weather is beautiful. The client is thrilled to be working with you. You walk the site, you check the airspace, everything feels great. But just before you launch, your VO squints and spots a thin, gray, uninsulated utility line running from a weathered street pole directly to the corner of the parapet wall you're supposed to inspect.
Almost impossible to see.
Right, it perfectly, flawlessly blends into the overcast sky behind it.
If you hadn't done the site survey, you would have launched right through it. What does the checklist demand in that exact moment?
The checklist demands a hard stop. You do not launch. You must instantly update your mental model of the site. You treat that invisible wire as the primary apex hazard of the entire operation.
So you have to redraw the bubble.
Yes. You have to physically adjust your flight geography to ensure your flight path never crosses the plane of that wire. You bring the VO over, physically point to the wire, and give them a specific brief. Your only job for the next 10 minutes is to make sure the drone stays at least 30 feet away from that line. Wow, hyperfocus.
Exactly. And most crucially, you have to dig into the drone's software and verify that your return to home altitude is set high enough that if the drone loses connection and flies back to you in a straight line, it doesn't drag itself right through that wire.
Because the drone won't see it.
Oh, absolutely not. The wire does not care if you have an advanced regulatory certification. It will rip the gimbal off your aircraft all the same. You cannot rely on the drone's obstacle avoidance sensors to see a wire like that. They are completely blind to thin gray objects against gray skies.
That requires such immense discipline. But what happens when the hazard isn't physical, but social? Scenario 2 explores client scope creep. And I think every working professional has faced this in some form. You are flying a construction site. Everything is fenced in, you have hard hats on, the environment is perfectly controlled, you are halfway through your pre-flight checklist, and the site manager taps you on the shoulder, points across a busy public street to another property, and says, "Hey, well, you've got the drone up. Can you just grab one quick wide shot of that building over there? It'll only take a second."
The famous last words, "It'll only take a second."
Exactly. As a pilot who relies on good reviews and, wants to keep the client happy and get hired again, how do I use the checklist to say no without sounding like an inflexible bureaucrat?
This is a classic trap, and it destroys operational safety. That quote-unquote one quick shot is never just a quick shot. It fundamentally alters the legal and physical reality of your operation. It massively expands your operational volume. It forces the drone to cross a public roadway, exposing moving vehicles and uninvolved pedestrians to kinetic risk. It might even push the drone into controlled airspace that you aren't authorized for.
Right, but how do I tell the client that without them thinking I'm just being lazy or unhelpful?
You externalize the no to the process. The checklist acts as your objective, emotionless third party. You don't say, "No, I don't want to do that." You say, "That's a great idea for a shot, but it fundamentally changes our flight geography. Let me stop and run the checklist for that new operational volume to see if we can do it legally."
Oh, that is so smart. You make it a shared problem-solving exercise rather than a confrontation.
Exactly. You pull out the site checklist, you verbally walk through it with the client standing right there. Okay, let's look at the terrain. To get over there, we have to fly over that busy intersection. Under FAA Part 107, we cannot sustain flight over moving vehicles without a waiver. Let's look at the environment. I don't have a safe emergency landing zone on that side of the street.
So you let the checklist be the bad guy.
Yes. You use the checklist to objectively demonstrate why the request is unsafe. The pilot must control whether a client's request becomes a reality. Just because a flight is physically possible does not mean it is legally smart, and just because a client asks for it does not mean it is safe.
So we have secured our legal paperwork, we've mapped out the physical hazards, we've outsmarted the invisible wires, and we've managed the client's expectations. We've passed gates 1 through 4. Now, finally, we get to look at the machine itself. But more importantly, we have to figure out what we are going to do when that machine inevitably decides to stop cooperating. Let's dig into the machine, the mission, and the inevitable emergency. These are gates 5, 6, and 7.
Right. Let's focus on gate 5, the machine. Both the FAA and Transport Canada hinge their mechanical regulations on a very specific phrase, condition for safe operation or serviceability. And we have to draw a massive thick line in the sand here. The drone turned on is vastly, fundamentally different from the drone is serviceable.
I have to admit, I'm struggling to see the line between a drone that turns on and one that is serviceable. I mean, if I put a battery in, push the button, the motors chime, and the lights flash green, my brain immediately says we are good to go. What am I missing? Give me the mechanical reality of what could actually be wrong.
Let's look at the mechanical reality. A propeller with a hairline crack near the hub will still spin up perfectly fine on the ground. The drone will turn on. A lithium polymer battery that has started to swell and puff up due to heat damage will still slot into the aircraft, provide power, and boot up the flight controller.
And the app will probably say, ready to fly.
It absolutely will. The internal compass might be heavily magnetized and throwing minor warnings, but the software will still allow you to force a takeoff if you just swipe to dismiss the alert. All of those states represent a machine that, quote-unquote, turned on. None of them represent a machine that is serviceable.
Because they're ticking time bombs.
Exactly. Serviceability means you, the pilot, are proactively identifying and replacing that cracked prop before the centrifugal force of a 30-mile-per-hour gust shatters it in midair and sends the drone through a windshield.
And serviceability doesn't just stop at the drone in the sky, right? It extends to the cockpit in your hands. The source material refers to this as the control station. Your aircraft could be in pristine factory new condition, but if you are standing in a hot parking lot in July and the iPad you are using as a monitor overheats, darkens its screen, and shuts down to protect itself, your cockpit just died.
Yes. The drone is fine, but you are completely blind.
Which perfectly highlights the absolute critical nature of the C2 link, the command and control link. It is the invisible radio frequency leash connecting your hands to the aircraft. Both regulatory bodies require you to verify the robustness of this link before launch. The memory hook a source uses is wonderfully blunt. No link, no launch.
It's that simple.
If your controller antennas are damaged, or your USB cable is fraying and causing the telemetry to stutter on the ground, it is going to fail completely when the drone is 400 feet in the air.
Exactly. And this feels like a really good time to dissect scenario 3 because it perfectly illustrates this gap between a machine that turns on and a machine that is serviceable, the cold battery.
Oh, this one is so counterintuitive.
It is. So imagine it is a brisk, chilly morning, maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit. You pull a battery out of your Pelican case that was sitting in the trunk of your car all night. You pop it into the drone. The screen lights up and says you have 92% battery. Everything looks green and ready. But what is the hidden chemical danger lurking in that battery?
The hidden danger is a phenomenon called voltage sag, right? And it is a killer of drones. A battery percentage number on a screen is essentially a digital guess. The software is looking at the current voltage and estimating how much capacity is left. But lithium polymer batteries rely on internal chemical reactions to actually release the energy.
Right, they're basically chemical engines.
And when the temperature of the cells drops, those chemical reactions slow down dramatically. The internal resistance of the batteries skyrockets.
So the energy is technically in there, but the battery physically can't push it out fast enough?
Precisely. If you launch with a cold 35-degree battery that claims to have 92%, the moment you ask that drone to perform a high-demand maneuver like climbing rapidly to 200 feet or fighting against a sudden strong gust of wind, the motors demand a massive spike in current.
And the battery just chokes.
It chokes. Because the cold chemicals cannot deliver that current, the voltage of the battery plummets instantly. The drone's computer sees the voltage collapse, thinks the battery is completely dead, and immediately triggers an emergency auto-landing protocol. It will descend straight down, completely ignoring your stick inputs, right into a tree, a lake, or a crowded street.
That is terrifying. So battery percentage is really just a clue. But battery readiness is an active incision. You have to physically ensure the battery is warm, maybe by keeping it in an inside pocket of your jacket against your body so it can actually handle the load.
Exactly. Which transitions us to gate 6, the mission. You cannot launch a perfectly serviceable warm battery without a crystal clear mission. You have to know exactly what data you are collecting, what flight path you are taking, and most importantly, when you are going to terminate the flight. In the U.S., 14 CFR 107.49 legally requires you to ensure you have enough available power for the intended operational time, plus a safe reserve.
You never plan to land at 0%.
Never. And that leads directly into Gate 7, the emergency plan. The source material draws a very sharp, unforgiving line between normal procedures, which is what you do when the drone actually obeys your commands, and emergency procedures. And there is a brutal, undeniable truth for operators here. If the first time you think about how to handle a flyaway is during the flyaway, you are hopelessly too late.
You are miles behind the aircraft. Emergency procedures must be pre-decided and preloaded into your brain. Because when the video link suddenly drops to static, or the app crashes, or a low-flying medical helicopter suddenly crests the tree line heading right for you, your physiological heart rate is going to spike to 140 beats per minute. Your adrenal glands are going to flood your system.
You go into fight or flight.
Literally. And under that level of stress, your ability to improvise complex solutions evaporates. You need a pre-programmed script to fall back on.
To help build that script rapidly, the checklist uses the BLADE mnemonic. BLADE, battery, links, airframe, data, and emergency settings. I want to hyper-focus on that E for emergency settings, specifically return to home, or RTH. I feel like RTH is treated by a lot of amateur pilots as a magical save me button.
Oh, absolutely.
You get confused, you lose the drone in the sun, you panic, and you just mash the RTH button and assume the drone will gently float back down to your feet. But relying on RTH like a magic spell feels like pulling the emergency parking brake in your car without bothering to look if you're currently driving over an icy bridge. It might stop the car, or it might send you spinning into the river.
That is a phenomenal way to reframe it. RTH is not magic. It is incredibly dumb automation. It is a simple algorithm that executes a pre-programmed set of instructions, completely devoid of situational context. The killer question that a good checklist forces you to ask is not, does the RTH function work? The question is, if RTH activates right now, will it command the drone to climb directly into the branches of an oak tree, the Java of construction crane, or the roofline of a stadium?
Because RTH usually climbs to a preset altitude before flying back, right?
Right. And if your RTH altitude is set to 100 feet from your last job, but today you are flying in a complex industrial park with a 150-foot radio tower directly between the drone and your launch point, your quote-unquote magic save me button is going to dutifully fly your expensive aircraft full speed into a lattice of steel.
That is a harsh lesson to learn.
It is. You have to configure the emergency settings, the return altitude, the return route, the obstacle avoidance behavior to map perfectly to the specific three-dimensional reality of your current site.
So all of these elements we have painstakingly explored, the physiological I'm safe check for the crew, the spatial site survey for the environment, the mechanical blade check for the drone and its emergency logic, they all have to funnel down into one specific defining moment in time. The moment where a list of observations transforms into an actual act of leadership. This brings us to the matrix of decision-making and regulatory reality.
This is the culmination of the entire pre-flight process, the go-no-go decision. This is the entire point of carrying a checklist. A checklist that merely allows you to document facts without forcing a binary decision is a complete waste of paper. The actual wording of the checklist is the secret to forcing that decision.
The sources outline a contrast between what they call weak items and strong items. A weak item is phrasing like weather checked. The problem with weather checked is that I can pull up my weather app, see that a Category 4 hurricane is making landfall in 10 minutes, tick the box on my clipboard, and technically, I didn't lie.
Yeah.
I checked it.
Exactly. And that is exactly how pencil whipping occurs. Weak wording allows for passive observation. A strong item forces a qualitative binding judgment. Instead of saying weather checked, a strong checklist says weather is within aircraft limitations, regulatory limits, and mission tolerances.
That's a huge difference.
It is. Instead of a vague battery checked, it says battery is physically seated, locked, sufficiently warm, with enough reserve capacity for the mission plus contingency. Strong wording makes it psychologically and legally much harder to fake your way through the pre-flight. It forces the pilot to explicitly declare that conditions are actually safe, not just that they looked at them.
And to give the pilot a definitive way to say no-go, we have the ultimate stop-trigger mnemonic. Red flags. REDFLAGS. Restrictions unresolved. Equipment abnormal. Deteriorating conditions. Fatigue or pressure. Landing zone compromised. Aircraft traffic. GPS or guidance unreliable. And sight no longer matches the plan. If a single one of those red flags is flying, the operation halts.
And implementing this strict binary framework is becoming increasingly vital because the regulatory landscape across North America is rapidly shifting to demand this level of precision. The days of just flying under the radar are over. Let's look at the Canadian 2025 regulatory expansion, SOR 2025-70.
Right, this is a huge update.
It was a monumental update to the aviation framework. Transport Canada unlocked the ability for operators to fly medium-sized drones, to conduct EVALOS extended visual line of sight operations where you use daisy-chained observers, and even some lower-risk BVLS beyond visual line of sight missions without having to beg the government for a special flight operations certificate for every single flight.
Which, on the surface, sounds like they're giving pilots a lot more freedom to operate.
They are giving more capability, but as the source material brilliantly notes, the sky got more capable, but the checklist got less forgiving. Because you are no longer submitting a massive safety case to the government for every flight, the entire burden of ensuring the safety of the public falls squarely on the pilot's daily routine procedures.
You're your own regulator, essentially.
Yes. The checklist has to independently confirm if your current flight profile falls under basic, advanced, or the new level 1 complex categories. It changes what operator certificates you must hold, what declarations you must make, and what your legal standoff distances from the public are.
And we are seeing the exact same tightening of the leash in the United States with the Part 107 updates. The FAA is allowing routine operations at night and operations over moving vehicles and people, but only if you meet incredibly strict criteria. For example, if you want to fly at night, your checklist must now verify the operational status of specific anti-collision lights that are visible for 3 statute miles.
You can't just slap a flashlight on it.
Right. You have to verify. Remote ID compliance ensuring your drone is actively broadcasting its license plate and location data to the public and law enforcement. The regulations are demanding that our operational discipline scales up perfectly with our new capabilities.
Yeah.
We can no longer just wing it.
Which brings up a really fascinating tactical piece of advice from the text about how to actually execute the checklist in the field. They argue that the absolute best checklist is a spoken checklist.
See, why is physically talking out loud superior to just reading the list silently in your head? That feels completely counterintuitive. I usually read things in my head specifically to go faster.
Well, that's exactly the problem. It comes back to the neuroscience of how the human brain processes information under stress. When you read silently, especially a document you've seen 100 times, your brain takes shortcuts. It skims. It recognizes the shape of the paragraph and jumps to the end.
The familiarity trap again.
Right. But when you force yourself to speak the words out loud, you engage the motor cortex and Broca's area of the brain. You physically slow the cognitive process down. You force your brain to process the information sequentially, word by word. You hear your own voice, which acts as a secondary verification loop.
And it also forces the rest of the crew to engage, right? If you're talking, they're listening.
It brings everyone into the loop. The source gives a masterclass example of what a perfect 60-second spoken briefing sounds like. It goes something like this. Okay, everyone, listen up. Mission is roof imagery, max altitude 120 feet. Airspace is uncontrolled. LANC is not required. Weather is within limits. Wind is 10 miles an hour from the west, so we need to watch for rotor turbulence near the parapet wall. TAS is the designated visual observer. Any aircraft entering the area, any person walking into the drop zone, any loss of video link, or any low battery warning means we immediately hold position or land. I am the RPIC, and anyone on this site can call stop at any time.
Wow. That is so clean, so authoritative. It immediately establishes a shared mental model. Everyone knows the plan, the hazards, and the abort triggers.
And that shared mental model is the foundation of what aviation professionals call a defensible checklist. Because the harsh reality is that you are not just flying for fun. You are flying heavy equipment for utility companies, engineering firms, and emergency services. If an incident happens, if the drone falls and damages property or injures a person, the FAA, Transport Canada, and insurance investigators are going to show up.
And they're going to ask questions.
Hard questions. You need to be able to defend your actions. A defensible checklist allows you to clearly answer 5 critical questions after the fact. What exact items did you check? What regulatory standard did you use to evaluate them? What was your final decision? Who was briefed on that decision? And finally, what changed during the flight?
Oh, that last question is massive. What changed during the flight? Because it implies that the pre-flight process doesn't magically end the second the drone leaves the ground.
It never ends. The checklist is a living, breathing contract with reality. When you said go, you made an agreement based on the conditions at that exact moment. But reality is incredibly dynamic. 10 minutes into the flight, the wind increases from 10 miles an hour to 25. A construction crew unexpectedly moves a massive crane directly into your planned recovery area. The client suddenly demands you fly lower over a busy road.
Everything is different now.
Yes. If reality changes, your original go decision is completely null and void. You must constantly, continuously reevaluate the environment against your red flags. If you cannot explain why the operation is safe right now, in this current minute, you do not get to continue flying just because you successfully launched 10 minutes ago.
If you cannot explain why it is safe, you do not get to launch just because it is possible. That is the definitive mic drop quote of this entire deep dive. We have covered an immense amount of conceptual and practical ground today. We started by looking at checklists as these annoying bureaucratic scrolls of terms and conditions that everyone just furiously scrolls past and ignores.
The illusion of safety.
Right. But by unpacking the 7 gates model, we've completely rebuilt them. We now see the checklist as a dynamic, spoken, rigorous decision-making engine. It is a vital tool that protects the mission, the crew, and the public from our own worst human impulses. Our rush to get the job done, our fatigue, our overconfidence.
It entirely shifts the operator's mindset away from passive compliance and elevates them into active command.
It really does. So to everyone listening, whether you are prepping for a high-end commercial cinema shoot, conducting a complex industrial roof inspection, or honestly, even if you are just applying these deep principles of structured decision-making and risk management to your own daily projects outside of aviation, remember this core truth. Merely completing the list is not the goal. Arriving at a correct, defensible decision is the goal. But before we sign off today, I want to hand it over to you for one final thought. We have spent this entire deep dive talking about human psychology and human decision-making. But where's all of this going as the technology inevitably evolves?
Well, if we connect everything we've discussed today to the broader trajectory of where the aviation industry is rapidly heading, it raises a truly fascinating and somewhat provocative question for the future. We established today that a great, robust pre-flight checklist is the pilot's first true act of command. It is a deeply human process of evaluating complex, shifting, gray area realities. But as our drone systems become increasingly automated, as we see drones entering the market that can self-diagnose microscopic faults in their own hardware, pull real-time micro-weather data from the cloud, and use advanced AI to propose their own optimized flight paths to route around invisible hazards, we have to ask ourselves a difficult question.
What's the question?
Will these highly smart systems make our human go-no-go decisions more precise and informed? Or will they slowly tempt us to surrender that command altogether? In 5 years, when the machine is capable of looking at you, running 1 trillion calculations a second and saying, I am safe to fly, who is really in charge of the operation?
Wow, that is the kind of question that keeps you up at night. And it is the kind of question that keeps you sharp when you are standing out there in the field. The next time you hit I agree on a massive wall of digital text, or the next time you pull a drone out of a case, I highly encourage you to apply the suck test to whatever process you are trusting your safety to. Stop scrolling, start thinking, and take command of your operation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay safe out there.
That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.